want to take Marcia.
Okay. All right.
Marcia from Marcia.
Marcia.
Or Marcia?
Yeah.
Which is it?
No, it's Marcia. Oh, it could be Marcia if it was the Jewish pronunciation. But
It's your name, Marcia.
Thank you, because I work overnight and it's so hard to get on with somebody. So,
okay.
I'm a 9/11 truther. So, but I guess like a Christian, I need to qualify which kind of truther. I just think that there was enough reason for another investigation to be warranted, right? And at this point, it's been so long, the only thing left probably is Freedom of Information Act. But the thing is, I kind of have learned from listening to a lot of the shows how to tune in, like a tuning fork or tuning your bicycle spoke because of you guys, the things that you teach. So when you can't speak for these people, Matt and Jen Peoples, so you can see how long ago it's been, when Matt and Jen were kind of like cracking up about truthers, it was like jarring because I had assumed that I was on the same page.
Okay.
And I don't know how to not be like a weirdo about it. Like obviously people think we're weird, but I think there are things that. So should I give an example of one thing?
Well, let me start with this, Marcia. I think first of all, you should call into Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, because this is a Truth Wanted call for sure. We talk about skepticism in general. I noticed that there's a lot of skepticism that isn't talked about in more of the conspiracy realm that I wanted to address. So that's one of the reasons why I started that show. So in the future, I suggest you go to there, because we've definitely talked about 9/11 stuff on there. I'll say this too. Your reason to be skeptical, right, of the events, the official events portrayed by the American government, I would say that that's not an unnatural inclination. And I would also say that there's a lot of Americans that agree with you. Last I checked, about like half of Americans say, like, at least the polls I've seen, think that there is something weird going on with 9/11, right? So there's a lot of people that are skeptical. Now, of course, the conversation comes as to whether or not that skepticism is warranted. So obviously you may have some specific observations that you want to bring up and point out. Before you do that, I think it's important to talk about what typically colors this conversation. And what typically colors this conversation, and what I've seen in truther communities, is the sources of information that people bring up when it comes to the specific claims that they make. A lot of the sources of information, as you are probably rightfully aware of, are pretty bananas, but also just not scientifically found as well, if they're talking about specific engineering and stuff. One of the big sources, one of the big catalysts that even started this movement, was a movie called Loose Change by Alex Jones. Yep. So maybe you're probably familiar with that.
Right.
And 9/11 truth was obviously a thing, but that one really kickstarted this movement and groups of people who have continued to question it and continue to talk about the events. Now, we can talk about specifically what you think might have happened or what you are suspect of. But to give my official stance on it, I do believe that this is an unusual event that has occurred. And by unusual, I mean it's an act of terror that we typically don't see in this country. And therefore, unusual things didn't happen. It's also weird that the United States response to this topic was to, in part, invade a country that had nothing to do with the actors that were involved in the state here. So there's even more reason to be skeptical of the events. But I do believe it was done by a group of individuals who committed this act and were wholly responsible for it. I don't think that the U.S. government specifically had anything to do with it, other than they were agitators in causing like a terrorist attack. That's not to say that they helped plan the event, but rather people were, of course, upset of American actions in the Middle East and stuff. So there you go. That's my long disclaimer, because this is a topic, of course, that I think requires a lot of disclaimers.
Right.
But Marcia, go ahead. I want to hear your thoughts.
So I don't even go as far as to say, like, I would posit a who or what. Like, there was the Bush and there was the guy that owned the building. And I just say that the so and I didn't read the commission report, so yes, that's against me. And yes, it is a source from a movie, but it's not Alex Jones's. It's 9/11, the new Pearl Harbor. And I have shown this to atheists, and they talk about how the beginning of it is very subjective. I don't care whether it's related to Pearl Harbor. I care about some of the questions brought up. For example, if I were able to talk to Matt and Jen, who were both in the military, and we just talk about the military aspect of it, where there were supposedly all these war games going on, and generals and people who were at key positions who were supposed to be contacted were out of reach or new on the job. And, I would say, is that something we would say is typical of our military? Or is that something, like people...
Oh, Marcia, I got a response for you.
Sorry.
2 things. First off, no. Don't apologize. This is great. I'm glad that you're being totally honest about how you feel about this topic. But first thing on that, you referenced something that I want to clarify that other people who aren't aware. You talked about the ownership of the buildings. One of the theories that's laid out is that an owner of the buildings who was Jewish basically was in part in scheming the 9/11 attacks to basically collect on insurance claims that happened when these towers fell. Right. So that's one narrative that's pushed out there. I understand that you specifically said that that's not something that you particularly subscribe to, but I want to give clarification for people who were wondering what you're talking about. The other thing is the American military incompetent.
Did do it. It's not because he was Jewish. That's I would say that.
Okay, that's fair enough. Go ahead. I will say that his Jewish ancestry is important to a lot of people, right? There's a lot of people who unfortunately will go the anti-Semitic route and say that he was involved with the New World Order, and that, of course, is they call it a Jewish organization and stuff, right? Like that's unfortunately a part of a lot of what the movement subscribes to. But again, not trying to particularly pin that on you, just saying that's where a lot of that comes from.
Right.
Going back to is it plausible to assume that the people who were in the chain of command fucked up this badly? I would say hell fucking yeah. The American military has fucked up a lot. Are you familiar with Pat Tillman, right? Like the guy that we got as a football quarterback into the American military, who was shot by one of his own squad mates, and that we pretended he died honorably in combat against enemy lines, like that was that was a spin that was done by the government because the American military fucked up. And they've absolutely fucked up in the past, and they will now. And we haven't even heard of the worst fuck ups, but we know, and I can point to chains of command in which there were failures for. So I am actually in total belief that it would be the fuck up of particular chains of command that would lead to an event like this. Absolutely.
Marcia. Marcia.
Yeah.
Do you spell it with CIA?
Yes, Marcia. It's a Spanish name or French.
Wait a second. CIA. Hang on a second, Marcia.
Oh shit.
Are you part?
Don't go there.
Are you part of it? Are you Marcia? I think this is a great call. This is I'm busting you, chaps. This is a great call for a fabulous show. Dan's mentioned it. Truth Wanted.
But
time. It's the time.
That was the thing. So I'm sleeping at 7.
I gotcha.
So I appreciate it. And I can't go through all of them. The thing is a 4-hour movie, and it brings up a lot of questions. And I've tried to look at. I would love to be able to hang out with people and watch the movie and say, well, how would you go through and find
explain some of the things? Yeah.
Where would we go to find it and things like that?
Sure. But here's what I need to do then, Marcia.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, well, so because I'm not going to be able to get that type of answering, I just wanted to tell you a few things that I like. Like, one, I love your theme song. I love that English dude's accent, but I may love it too much because I cannot watch the show when he's on. All I do is try to copy his accent. Zeno, I get a headache. And he was on today. But
Yeah.
if I had to debate somebody like him, I would just ask, is this something that you use to discriminate against people or anything like that? And if it's not that, have the God. I don't really care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
Well, here's what I was going to say. I was going to do,
Marcia.
Marcia. So we do have to kind of wrap things up because we're
Yep.
kind of at the tail end of the show. But if there's enough requests from folks like you, maybe I will do a more dedicated episode on Truth Wanted, kind of debunking some of the popular claims that come up. The problem, the 9/11 is interesting insofar as there's not just one 9/11 conspiracy theory, right? Like, I think that's a common misnomer that it's just one thing. There's a multitude of angles that people will go about this. So that's why it makes it a more difficult topic to comprehensively kind of debunk, because there's so many different ideas that you have to debunk when talking about. So maybe it's warranted that I talk to somebody who's also maybe an expert on it, or at least knowledgeable on it, and we can talk about it some more, so that I can reassure you that that you know what may prescribe may have happened the way that most people think that it happened, or at least has been claimed to happen. But like I said, regardless, we are at the tail end of the show here, so I do have to let you go. But you know what? I will say I appreciate you being honest about it and telling us that, hey, you don't think, you're not too sure about this, because there's a lot of people who are like, I feel this way, but they don't want to talk about it. And I'd rather talk to somebody that is willing to talk about it. Yeah, I'd rather do that, because then you can make progress. Then you can potentially make change. Or if you're right, you convinced me, and then we learn something new. But as of right now, of course, I'm not convinced of most claims of the truther movement. But anyway, Marcia, thanks so much for calling.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we really do appreciate it.